fancy clothes, though, where's old Mac Heath, baby? So there's never a trace of it. Now let that thing get through on the side.
In a sense, although the individual songs of his works became popular in their own right, he very rarely actually wrote popular songs as such. They were always integrated into complete theatre pieces, but then managed to detach themselves in various ways and become well-known tunes in their own right, often so well known that people didn't even know that they were by Kurt Weill.
And Waits himself was unaware of Weill's work. Unlike the other artists here, he didn't get introduced to his music by a friend or stumble across it by chance. He only became conscious of Weill after friends and journalists assumed that the German composer must have been an inspiration for swordfish trombones.
Waits told me that people were coming up to him and saying, you know, that sounds really like Kurt Weill. You've obviously been listening to Kurt Weill. And he hadn't, or he claims that he hadn't really. I mean, there clearly were things on swordfish trombones that made people think of Kurt Weill. I'm not actually sure what they would be.
Apparently he made swordfish trombones before hearing Weill or before consciously being aware of Weill. But the first track, Underground, sounds like it's straight out of the Threepenny Opera. You've got this marching bass line. And you've got this, this minor key melody, which just modulates at the right time. They're alive, they're awake, while the rest of the world is asleep. That bit there is pure Kurt Weill. So if he hasn't been studying it, it's already in him. It's already in his blood.
Yet after the connection had been made, Waits decided to actively investigate Weill's canon. And while he was becoming obsessed with the music he was discovering, record producer Hal Wilner, who had specialized in unusual tribute albums, invited Waits to contribute to his new LP, Lost in the Stars, the music of Kurt Weill. Released in 1985, Waits' distinctive cover of the song What Keeps Mankind Alive highlighted the closeness of their musical vision.
That is where we first hear Waits doing that very snide, angry, bilious, European satirical music we've never really heard him do before. And then that becomes a very important part of what Waits is interested in.
You gentlemen who think you have a mission.
Maybe he felt that he had exhausted a certain kind of American sensibility, and he really wanted to explore this more European kind of avant-garde style.
It's not a faithful rendition, obviously. Tom Waits, like Weill, has aspirations to create his own sonic image of the piece, which he very much does. So it doesn't sound like Weill in that regard. He doesn't sing it like Mac Heath would have done, or in this particular case, as Mr. Peachum. He has his own particular vocal style, but I think he very much conveys the spirit of cynical, resigned protest about the ways of the world that you find in a number of Waits songs that are beautifully captured already, if you like, anticipated in that number, that finale that he performs in Lost in the Stars.
And with the release of Rain Dogs the same year, the influence of Weill upon Waits' music became particularly pronounced.
Well, the difference between something like Underground and Rain Dogs is the difference between somebody who might have heard Kurt Weill once on the radio and someone who's soaked himself a little bit in it. There's a real positive injection of Weill-esque influences there. The title track, Rain Dogs, itself is very Weill-esque. It starts with accordion playing on the harmonic minor scale of G flat. Just improvising on that scale, which instantly creates a sort of European melancholy, specifically 1920s Germanic theatre music. Now that chromatic shift there from G flat minor to G is very Weill.
Inside a broken clock, slice the wine with all the windows. Taxi, 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 we're round the walk. Huddle the doorway with the windows. All right, going back home.
Again, Tom Waits doesn't go to great lengths to duplicate or emulate the complex harmonic maze that Weill does as a matter of course. But it's just little harmonic shifts like that, little chromatic shift from G flat minor to G major, completely unexpected. It means that he's got his ears open enough for it to indicate this is Weill, this is what I've been listening to, this is the world I'm in.
And Waits would plunge even further into that world over his next few projects, which would see him actually working within a theatrical context. His first foray into this arena was the follow-up to Rain Dogs, Frank's Wild Years, which was both a play and an album. Yet it was in his collaboration with avant-garde stage director Robert Wilson and beat writer William S. Burroughs, The Black Rider, that he seemed to draw the most inspiration from Kurt Weill.
Weill is like an obvious reference point for Tom to pursue at that point. I mean, you're talking about this, he's working with Burroughs, you know, who's doing the book, and he's working with Wilson, and he's also doing it in Germany, and it's based on these German Faustian sort of myths, and it has sort of this carnival-esque element to it. So, whereas I think in some ways Nino Rota is more of an influence as you go from like One from the Heart into Sword Trish Trombones, and filmic music had been a huge part in influence on Tom. Now as he starts working in the theater, first with Frank's Wild Years and then on these projects with Wilson, Kurt Weill is a natural place for him to go to. Again, it's the range of instrumentation. You look at the instrumentation and the notes for Black Rider, and it's pretty much the same thing you would have heard in a stage recording for Kurt Weill from the 40s or something like that, even back to the 20s.
It's interesting that the Black Rider is based on the Der Freischütz, which is an opera that Kurt Weill hugely admired, in a way became a model for some of what he was interested in doing. This is actually a German Singspiel, which was the basis of that Songspiel. They both have an ear for vernacular music, but they don't just produce the vernacular music in its authentic state, in its original state, but they distort it in interesting ways, in ironic ways. And Weill did this a lot. He would take fanfares and the music of the circus and the music of the street and the music of the music hall, and he didn't just reproduce it as if he were being commissioned to write music for those particular venues, but he would use that music as topics that contributed to something else. And I think Waits is very much that kind of composer as well. You can hear in Black Rider, for example, the music of the circus, but you don't hear it as music that you would literally hear performed at the circus. But it's projected through a kind of what you might call acoustic distorting mirror. And that is something that Weill was an absolute master of.
And by the end of the 90s and into the new millennium, Waits himself has now proved a master of the various styles he has developed. With a return to the piano ballads of his early work on 1999's Mule Variations, the further pursuit of Teutonic dissonance with the theatrical works Alice and Blood Money, and the multifaceted 2004 release Real Gone, he can now move between genres and styles at a whim. And like those artists who inspired his own work, Waits himself has inevitably become an influence on a whole generation of musicians.
I think there are certain musicians who wind up becoming gateways to whole other universes. Tom's influences allowed him to enter into different realms. We talked about Parch, we talked about Weill, we talked about Beefheart. They're doorways that he can walk through, and then he's changed, you know, but he can access this realm. Tom Waits takes in such a wide range of influences and such a wide range of really challenging and interesting influences that he's an influence in that same way. He opens up this whole universe for other musicians to go into, and you can set up camp in one tiny corner of Tom Waits and make a whole career now. I mean, Tom Waits is like an education. You know, you can start with Tom Waits and you're never going to exhaust his work or his influences. He really increases the musical vocabulary of the music that kind of follows after him. He creates, you know, this much broader range of references.